The sound of approaching horses echoed through the dense forest as Ruby Fletcher pressed her trembling body against the rough bark of a pine tree, holding her breath in silent terror. It had been 3 days since she'd escaped, 3 days of running until her feet bled, 3 days of hiding from the men who had destroyed everything she once knew. Montana Territory, 1876. A place where a woman alone was as vulnerable as a newborn calf during a wolf hunt. Ruby's throat ached from the effort of containing the screams that would never come. Not anymore. Not since that night when the raiders came. Her voice had died along with her family, strangled by the horror she had witnessed. Now, at 22, she was alone in a vast wilderness with nothing but the tattered dress on her back and memories too terrible to face. The hoofbeats grew louder. Ruby closed her eyes, digging her fingers into the tree bark until splinters embedded themselves beneath her nails. Her heart hammered so violently she feared it might betray her presence. "Tracks lead this way." A gruff voice called out. Ruby's eyes flew open. They weren't the raiders, different voices, different men, but men nonetheless, and that was enough reason to stay hidden. The horses slowed, and Ruby could hear the distinct sound of boots hitting the ground as a rider dismounted. "They're fresh," the same voice declared. "Can't be more than an hour old." "You certain it's a woman?" another asked. "Small footprints, and look here, cloth caught on this branch, calico." Ruby glanced down at her dress, noticing for the first time the torn edge where a piece had been ripped away. Foolish mistake, fatal mistake. "Whoever she is, she's running scared," a third voice said, softer than the others. "Those aren't the tracks of someone taking a casual stroll." Ruby strained to hear the response, but the men had lowered their voices. She carefully shifted her weight, trying to get a glimpse of them through the foliage without revealing her position. That's when the branch beneath her foot snapped with a crack that might as well have been a gunshot in the silent forest. "Over there," Ruby ran. Her legs, already exhausted beyond measure, found new strength born of pure desperation. She darted between trees, jumped over fallen logs, and splashed through a shallow creek, ignoring the icy bite of the water against her skin. Behind her, horses crashed through the underbrush. They were gaining on her. Of course they were. No human could outrun a horse, especially not one as exhausted as she was. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred. And then, as she scrambled up a steep embankment, her dress caught on a jutting rock. Ruby tumbled backward, rolling down the slope until she crashed into the creek bed below. Pain exploded through her ankle, and she knew immediately it was sprained, if not broken. This was it. The end of her desperate flight. Ruby crawled backward until her spine pressed against a boulder. She would not die cowering. She would face them, even if she couldn't scream, couldn't beg for mercy. A horse appeared at the top of the embankment, and its rider quickly dismounted, sliding down the slope with controlled steps. He approached slowly, hands held out before him like one might approach a wounded animal. "Easy now," he said, his voice the softer one she'd heard earlier. "We're not going to hurt you." Ruby didn't believe him. She'd heard kind words before. They meant nothing. He stopped a few yards away, crouching down to her level. His face was partially shadowed by the brim of his hat, but she could see he was younger than she'd expected, perhaps in his late 20s. Broad-shouldered and tall, with a sun-browned face that spoke of years spent outdoors. "My name's Cole Matthews," he said. "I'm the foreman at the Double Creek Ranch." He gestured behind him where 2 other men waited with the horses. "That's John and Miguel. We're tracking a group of raiders who hit a settlement 2 valleys over, killed a whole family." His eyes, a startling shade of blue against his tanned skin, studied her with concern. "But I'm guessing you already know about them." Ruby stared at him, her chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. Raiders, the same ones she didn't know, it didn't matter. All men with guns were a threat. Cole took off his hat, revealing dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. The gesture somehow made him look less threatening. "You're hurt," he observed, glancing at her ankle, "and from the looks of it, you haven't eaten in days." Ruby remained silent, not by choice but by necessity. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked gently. Ruby's hand went instinctively to her throat, her fingers pressing against the skin as if trying to massage the words out. Her lips parted, but nothing came, not even a whisper. Understanding dawned in Cole's eyes. "You can't speak," he said. It wasn't a question. Ruby shook her head slowly. He seemed to consider this for a moment, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook and a pencil. He offered them to her, extending his arm but not coming any closer. "Can you write?" he asked. Ruby hesitated before reaching for the items. Her fingers brushed against his as she took them, and she flinched at the contact. Cole didn't react to her response, simply waiting patiently as she opened the notebook with trembling hands. Ruby stared at the blank page. It had been so long since she'd written anything. Back when she taught at the little schoolhouse in her settlement, back before everything changed. She pressed the pencil to the paper and carefully wrote, "Ruby Fletcher." She turned the notebook so Cole could read it. "Ruby," he said, as if testing how the name felt on his tongue. "Were you running from the raiders, Miss Fletcher?" She nodded, then wrote, 3 days. Cole's expression darkened. 3 days on foot. He looked back at her torn dress, her bleeding feet visible through her worn-out boots, and the hollow cheeks that spoke of hunger and exhaustion. "Miss Fletcher, I promise you, we're not like those men. We're trying to bring them to justice, but you need help. Food, medical attention. Our ranch is a half-day's ride from here. My sister Rose is there. You'd be safe with us until you heal up." Ruby's fingers tightened around the pencil. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, yet dying alone in the wilderness seemed an equally poor option. She wrote, "How do I know?" Cole read her words and nodded, understanding her fear. "You don't," he admitted, "except that if we meant you harm, we wouldn't be having this conversation." He gestured toward her ankle. "That needs tending, and night's coming. These woods aren't safe after dark, not just because of men, but wolves and mountain lions too." Ruby glanced at the sky visible through the tree canopy. The sun was indeed lowering, painting the clouds with streaks of orange and pink. She had no supplies, no shelter, and now a damaged ankle. Logic told her that her chances of survival were greater with these men than without them, even if they ultimately proved to be no better than the others. She wrote, "Okay." Relief softened Cole's features. "Thank you for trusting us," he said, though they both knew trust had little to do with her decision. "May I help you up? That ankle won't bear weight." Ruby hesitated before nodding. Cole moved slowly, telegraphing his movements as he approached. When he slipped an arm around her waist to help her stand, Ruby went rigid, but she didn't pull away. She needed his support to rise. "John," Cole called up to his companion, "bring my horse down." The man named John led a chestnut gelding down the embankment. Cole helped Ruby limp toward it. "I'll ride with you," he explained. "To make sure you don't fall." Ruby's eyes widened in alarm, and she shook her head vigorously, understanding her concern. Cole amended his plan. "All right, you ride, and I'll lead the horse on foot. Would that be better?" After a moment's consideration, Ruby nodded. With as much dignity as she could muster, Ruby allowed Cole to help her onto the saddle. The height made her dizzy, but she gripped the pommel with white-knuckled determination. Cole handed her back the notebook and pencil, which she tucked into the pocket of her dress, before taking the reins and leading the horse carefully up the embankment. The other 2 men watched her with undisguised curiosity, but maintained their distance. One was older, perhaps in his 50s, with a grizzled beard and weathered face. The other was younger, with dark features that suggested Mexican heritage. "This is Miss Ruby Fletcher," Cole introduced her. "She's been fleeing the raiders for 3 days. Miss Fletcher can't speak, so please don't press her with questions. We're taking her back to Double Creek." Both men touched the brims of their hats in respectful greeting. Neither commented on her silence, for which Ruby was grateful. "We should make camp soon," the older man John suggested. "Won't make it back to the ranch before nightfall now," Cole nodded. "There's a clearing about 2 miles east that would serve. Miss Fletcher needs food and rest before anything else." The journey to the clearing passed in tense silence. Ruby clung to the saddle, trying to ignore the pain in her ankle and the growing awareness of just how helpless she was in the company of these strangers. Cole walked beside the horse, occasionally glancing up at her but never pressing her to communicate. When they reached the clearing, the men efficiently set up a small camp. John built a fire while Miguel tended to the horses. Cole rummaged through their supplies and produced a can of beans, some jerky, and a flask of water, which he offered to Ruby after helping her down from the horse and settling her near the fire. "It's not much," he apologized, "but it's hot and it'll put some strength back in you." Ruby accepted the food with a grateful nod, trying not to devour it too quickly despite her ravenous hunger. As she ate, Cole knelt beside her and gestured toward her ankle. "May I?" he asked, Ruby hesitated before extending her legs slightly. Cole gently removed her boot, his touch clinical rather than familiar. The ankle was swollen and beginning to bruise, but when Cole carefully manipulated it, Ruby could tell it wasn't broken. "Just a bad sprain," he confirmed. "I'll wrap it for now, but my sister's much better at this sort of thing. She'll fix you up proper when we get to the ranch." He soaked a bandana in cool water from the creek and wrapped it around her ankle, then bound it with a strip of clean cloth from his saddlebag. His hands were calloused but gentle, and he worked with an efficiency that suggested he'd treated many such injuries before. When he finished, he sat back on his heels and studied her face. "You should try to sleep, Miss Fletcher. We'll head out at first light." Ruby nodded, but even as exhausted as she was, the thought of sleeping surrounded by strange men filled her with dread. She reached for the notebook and wrote, "I will keep watch." Cole read her message and understanding crossed his face. "You don't need to stay awake, I'll be on watch all night." Ruby's expression must have conveyed her disbelief, because Cole's features softened. "I give you my word," he said quietly. "No harm will come to you while you're under my protection, not from outsiders and certainly not from me or my men." There was something in his eyes, a steadiness, a sincerity that made Ruby want to believe him, but wanting and doing were different things. She wrote, "I will still keep watch." Cole nodded, accepting her decision without argument. "As you wish, but the offer of protection stands all the same." He moved away to confer with his men, leaving Ruby to contemplate her situation. The food had restored some of her strength, and the bandage on her ankle had reduced the throbbing pain to a dull ache. She was still in danger, would be for as long as the raiders roamed free, but for the first time in 3 days, she wasn't actively fleeing for her life. As darkness fell, the men arranged their bedrolls around the fire. True to his word, Cole positioned himself between Ruby and the forest's edge, his rifle across his lap as he settled in for his watch. John and Miguel were soon asleep, their soft snores blending with the night sounds of the forest. Ruby leaned against a fallen log, wrapped in a blanket Cole had given her. She fought against the exhaustion pulling at her eyelids, determined to stay alert. But the warmth of the fire, the relative safety of the camp, and the bone-deep weariness from days of running soon overwhelmed her resolve. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Cole's silhouette against the firelight, his posture vigilant as he kept his promise to watch over her through the night. Ruby woke with a start, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, panic seized her as she tried to remember where she was and how she had gotten there. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, her capture by Cole and his men, their offer of help, the makeshift camp. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, the stars fading as dawn approached. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint orange glow over the sleeping forms of John and Miguel. Cole was still sitting where she had last seen him, his back straight despite having maintained his vigil all night. As if sensing her gaze, he turned to look at her. "Morning," he greeted softly. "How's the ankle?" Ruby flexed her foot experimentally. The swelling seemed to have gone down somewhat, though it still hurt to move it. She gave a small nod, which Cole seemed to interpret correctly as better but not good. "We'll get you to Rose today," he promised. "She's got a knack for healing." Ruby reached for the notebook he had given her and wrote, "Your sister." Cole nodded. "Yes, she keeps house at Double Creek. Our parents died when we were young, so it's just been the two of us for a long time." A fond smile crossed his face. "She's got a sharp tongue and stronger opinions, but there's no better woman to have on your side in trouble." Ruby found herself curious about this woman who had earned such obvious respect from her brother. She wrote, "Is she married?" "No," Cole replied, "though not for lack of suitors. Rose says she's waiting for a man who can match her wit and doesn't mind being told when he's wrong." He chuckled softly. "I suspect she'll be waiting a long while." The conversation was interrupted as John stirred and sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Sun's coming up," he observed unnecessarily. "Best get moving if we want to make it back before midday." Within an hour, the camp had been packed up, the fire doused, and the horses saddled. Cole helped Ruby onto his horse again, but this time he seemed more concerned with her comfort. "It's a few hours' ride," he explained. "Let me know if you need to stop." Ruby nodded, clutching the saddle horn as Cole led the horse out of the clearing and onto a narrow trail heading west. John and Miguel followed behind, occasionally speaking in low tones to each other but mostly riding in companionable silence. As they traveled, Ruby had time to observe Cole more carefully. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to the wilderness, his steps sure on the uneven ground. Despite having been awake all night, he showed no signs of fatigue. His broad shoulders carried no tension, and his hand rested lightly on his holstered revolver, not in anticipation of trouble, but in readiness for it. The trail gradually widened as they descended from the forested hills into more open country. By mid-morning, they crested a rise, and Cole stopped, allowing Ruby to take in the view before them. Spread across a verdant valley was a sprawling ranch. A large two-story house stood proudly near the center, surrounded by various outbuildings, corrals, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed. A creek, presumably the Double Creek that gave the ranch its name, wound through the property, its waters glinting in the sunlight. "Home," Cole said simply, a note of pride in his voice. Ruby stared at the scene, struck by its peaceful beauty. After days of terror and flight, the ranch appeared like an oasis of civilization in the wilderness, yet she couldn't help but feel a twinge of apprehension. Her own home had seemed safe once too. Cole must have sensed her unease, for he looked up at her with reassurance in his eyes. "The raiders have never come this far west," he told her, "and if they did, they'd find more than they bargained for. Every man at Double Creek knows how to defend what's ours." His confidence was somewhat comforting, but Ruby had learned the hard way that no place was truly safe. She merely nodded in acknowledgement of his words and braced herself as they began the descent into the valley. As they approached the ranch, Ruby could see figures moving about, men working with horses in the corrals, others driving a small herd of cattle toward a distant pasture. A woman emerged from the main house, shading her eyes against the sun as she watched their approach. "That's Rose," Cole informed her. When they reached the yard in front of the house, the woman hurried toward them. She was tall for a woman, with the same dark hair as Cole, though hers was pulled back in a practical braid. Her dress was simple but well made, and she moved with purposeful strides that spoke of confidence and capability. "3 days you've been gone," she called out to Cole as they drew near. "I was beginning to think you'd decided to join the cavalry after all." Cole grinned at his sister's teasing. "And leave you to terrorize the ranch hands all by yourself. I wouldn't dream of it." Rose's smile faded as her gaze shifted to Ruby. Concern immediately replaced her playful expression. "Who's this?" "Miss Ruby Fletcher," Cole replied, helping Ruby down from the horse. "We found her in the eastern hills, fleeing from raiders. She's injured and hasn't eaten properly in days." Rose's eyes widened slightly, and she immediately stepped forward to support Ruby on her other side. "Bring her inside, quickly. John, tell Maria to heat water and prepare a bath. Miguel, fetch my medicine box from the pantry." Both men hurried to comply with her instructions, while Cole and Rose helped Ruby into the house. The interior was neat and comfortable, with solid furniture and touches of refinement that suggested the Matthews siblings valued both practicality and beauty. They led her to a sitting room where a sofa covered in faded but clean floral fabric awaited. As Ruby sank onto the cushions, Rose knelt to examine her ankle. "Cole's bandaging," she observed with a critical eye. "Not terrible for a man who thinks tobacco poultices cure everything." She glanced up at Ruby's face. "I'm Rose Matthews. I'd say welcome to Double Creek, but I suspect you didn't plan on being here." Ruby shook her head, then gestured to her throat and opened her mouth in a silent explanation. Rose's expression softened with understanding. "You can't speak," she said, not as a question but as a simple acknowledgement of fact. When Ruby nodded, Rose continued, "That's all right. There are other ways to communicate." Cole, who had been hovering nearby, handed the notebook to his sister. "Miss Fletcher can write." Rose took the notebook and glanced at the few brief messages Ruby had written thus far. "Good, we'll work with that." She turned back to Ruby. "First things first, you need a bath, clean clothes, food, and proper medical attention, then rest. Everything else can wait." The decisiveness in Rose's manner was reassuring. Here was someone who took control of situations, who knew what needed to be done and did it without hesitation. Ruby found herself relaxing slightly under the woman's capable care. Over the next hour, Ruby experienced a level of nurturing she hadn't known since before the raid on her settlement. Maria, the ranch's cook and housekeeper, prepared a bath in a private room. Rose provided clean clothes, a simple dress that was slightly too large but wonderfully clean, and tended to Ruby's ankle with a poultice of herbs that smelled medicinal but not unpleasant. After the bath, Rose helped Ruby to a small bedroom on the ground floor. "You'll stay here," she explained. "It's normally our guest room, but we don't get many visitors this far from town. The window faces the east garden, so you'll have morning sun." Ruby wrote in the notebook, "Thank you, too kind." Rose read the message and shook her head firmly. Kindness has nothing to do with it. Common decency, perhaps, or simple humanity. Her expression darkened. "The men who did this to you, who drove you from your home, they're the aberration, not us." Ruby wasn't sure she believed that anymore. In her experience, cruelty seemed far more common than kindness. But she appreciated the sentiment all the same. A soft knock at the door preceded Cole's entrance. He carried a tray with a bowl of steaming soup and fresh bread. "Maria insisted you eat something substantial," he explained, setting the tray on a small table near the bed. "She's personally offended by how thin you are." Despite everything, Ruby felt a smile tug at the corners of her mouth. It felt strange, almost painful, like exercising a muscle long unused. Cole noticed the expression and smiled in return, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "There's a sight I wasn't sure we'd see," he commented. "A smile suits you, Miss Fletcher." Ruby quickly looked down, self-conscious under his gaze. She wrote, "Just Ruby, not Miss." Cole read her note and nodded. "Ruby then, though I hope you'll extend the same courtesy and call me Cole." Ruby nodded, suddenly aware of how domestic this scene must appear, a man bringing food to a woman in a bedroom, his sister playing chaperone. In another context, it might have seemed almost courtship-like. The thought brought heat to her cheeks, and she busied herself with the soup to hide her reaction. Rose, observant as ever, caught the exchange and the blush that followed. "Cole, don't you have ranch business to attend to, cattle to count or fences to mend or some other suitably masculine task?" Cole shot his sister an amused look. "Subtle as always, Rose." He turned back to Ruby. "She's right, though. I should check in with the men, see what's happened in our absence." He hesitated, then added, "You're safe here, Ruby, I promise." After he left, Rose sat in a chair near the bed, watching as Ruby ate the soup. "My brother's a good man," she said after a while. "Too good, sometimes. Takes the weight of the world on his shoulders." Ruby paused in her eating, uncertain how to respond to this personal observation. "I'm telling you this," Rose continued, "because I want you to understand something about Double Creek. We look after our own here, and for as long as you're under this roof, that includes you." Her gaze was steady, almost challenging. "Whatever happened to you, whoever hurt you, they can't reach you here." Ruby appreciated the sentiment, but experience had taught her that safety was an illusion. She wrote, "The raiders killed everyone at my settlement. They will kill me too if they find me." Rose read the message, her expression grim. "How many of them were there?" Ruby held up 8 fingers. 8 men against 1 settlement." Rose's voice hardened. "Cowards and murderers." Ruby nodded, then wrote, "I taught the children, hid when they came, saw everything." Rose's eyes widened slightly. "You witnessed it all," she murmured. "And that's when you lost your voice." Ruby nodded again, her hand unconsciously rising to her throat. The memories threatened to overwhelm her, the screams, the gunfire, the smell of smoke and blood, but she pushed them away. She had survived, that had to count for something. "Well," Rose said firmly, rising from her chair, "you need rest now, your body needs to heal, and so does your spirit." She gestured to a small bell on the bedside table. "Ring if you need anything, I'll be within hearing distance." After Rose left, Ruby finished her soup and settled back against the pillows. The bed was softer than anything she'd slept on in days, and the clean sheets smelled of lavender. Despite her lingering fear and the strangeness of her surroundings, exhaustion soon pulled her into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next few days passed in a blur of recovery. Ruby's ankle improved under Rose's care, and regular meals began to restore her strength. She remained mostly in her room, venturing out only for brief periods to sit on the porch when the house felt too confining. Cole visited daily, usually in the evenings after his work was done. He would bring her small gifts, a book from his modest library, wildflowers from the pasture. a carved wooden bird that one of the ranch hands had made. His visits were brief and respectful, with Rose often present, but Ruby found herself looking forward to them nonetheless. On the fourth day, when Ruby was able to walk short distances without pain, Cole knocked on her door with a proposition. "I thought you might like to see more of the ranch," he suggested. "There's a gentle mare in the stable who would carry you safely if you're interested." Ruby hesitated. She had ridden horses before everyone in her settlement had, but the thought of venturing beyond the safety of the house made her nervous. Yet the walls were beginning to close in on her, and the idea of fresh air and open spaces was tempting. She wrote, "Yes, but not far." Cole's smile brightened his entire face. "Not far," he agreed. "Just around the immediate property. I'll have Daisy saddled and ready in an hour." True to his word, Cole had a placid chestnut mare waiting when Ruby emerged from the house, dressed in a riding skirt borrowed from Rose. The day was perfect for riding, sunny but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers and grass. Cole helped Ruby mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. Once she was settled in the saddle, he mounted his own horse, a larger bay gelding that pranced eagerly, ready to run. "We'll take it slow," he assured her, noticing her apprehension. "Daisy knows these trails better than any human. She won't let you fall." They rode at a walking pace, Cole pointing out various features of the ranch: the creek that provided water for the cattle, the north pasture where the best grass grew, the distant line of trees that marked the boundary of his property. "Double Creek wasn't always this size," he explained as they paused to rest on a small rise overlooking the valley. "My father started with just 50 acres and a dream. Each year he'd save enough to buy a little more land. By the time he died, we had 500 acres. Pride colored his voice as he added, "Rose and I have added another 300 since then." Ruby studied his profile as he gazed out over his domain. There was something undeniably attractive about a man who had built something from almost nothing, who took such obvious pride in his work without crossing into arrogance. She wondered what his father would think of the man his son had become. As if reading her thoughts, Cole turned to meet her gaze. "My pa would have welcomed you to Double Creek," he said quietly. "He believed in helping folks in need, said it was the only way to civilize the frontier by remembering our common humanity." Ruby pulled out the small notebook she now carried with her everywhere and wrote, "He sounds like a good man, like his son." Cole read her words and a faint color touched his cheeks. "I try to live up to his example," he said simply, "not always successfully." They rode in companionable silence for a while longer before Cole suggested they head back. "Don't want to tire you out on your first day up and about," he explained. As they approached the ranch house, Ruby noticed increased activity around the stables and yard. Men were saddling horses, checking weapons, and speaking in urgent tones. Cole immediately tensed beside her. "Something's wrong," he muttered, spurring his horse forward. Ruby followed more cautiously, anxiety building in her chest. They found Rose on the porch, giving instructions to a group of ranch hands. She looked relieved when she saw them. "Cole, there you are. John just rode in from town with news." "What happened?" Cole demanded, dismounting in one fluid motion and striding to his sister's side. "The raiders hit the Thompson place last night," Rose said grimly. "Burned it to the ground. The family escaped, thank God, but they lost everything." Ruby felt the blood drain from her face. The raiders were closer than she'd thought, much closer. Her hands tightened on the reins until her knuckles turned white. Cole's expression hardened. "How many men?" "8, according to the Thompsons' description. 8, the same number Ruby had indicated. The same men who had destroyed her settlement were now within striking distance of Double Creek. "They're growing bolder," Cole said, his voice tight with anger. "The Thompson place is only 15 miles from here." Rose nodded, her own face set in determined lines. "I've already sent Miguel to alert the neighboring ranches. John's organizing our men." She glanced at Ruby, still mounted on Daisy, her face a mask of barely contained terror. "Help her down, Cole. She needs to know what's happening." Cole turned and quickly moved to Ruby's side, reaching up to help her dismount. His hands lingered at her waist longer than necessary, as if he wanted to offer comfort but wasn't sure how. "It's all right," he said softly, though they both knew it wasn't. "We're preparing. They won't catch us by surprise." Once inside, Rose explained the situation more fully. The raiders had attacked the Thompson ranch under cover of darkness, first setting fire to the barn to create confusion, then looting the house. The family had escaped only because Mr. Thompson had the foresight to hustle his wife and children out a back window when he first spotted the flames. The sheriff's forming a posse, Rose continued, but these men don't stay in one place long. By the time the law gets organized, they could be anywhere. Ruby listened with growing dread. She knew these men's tactics all too well. They would strike quickly, take what they wanted, and disappear into the wilderness, only to emerge elsewhere when least expected. She wrote in her notebook, "They will come here next." Cole read her message and exchanged a grave look with Rose. "It's possible," he admitted. "We're the largest ranch in the area, a tempting target. But we're also the best defended," Rose countered, "and unlike the Thompsons, we have warning." Ruby wasn't convinced. She had seen what these men were capable of, the ruthless efficiency with which they destroyed lives. She wrote, "They kill for pleasure, not just for gain." The siblings read her words in silence, the full import of her warning sinking in. These weren't ordinary bandits looking for a quick score. They were something worse, men who had abandoned all pretense of humanity. "Then we'll be ready for them," Cole said finally, his voice hard with resolve. "Every man on this ranch knows how to fight. We have the high ground, good sightlines, and enough ammunition to hold off twice their number." Ruby wished she could share his confidence, but fear had wrapped its cold fingers around her heart. If the raiders came to Double Creek, more people would die, people who had shown her nothing but kindness, people like Cole and Rose. As if sensing her thoughts, Cole placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Ruby," he said softly, "I know you're afraid. You have more reason than most to fear these men, but I promise you we won't let them hurt anyone else. Not you, not my sister, not anyone under my protection." The fierce determination in his eyes was almost enough to make her believe him. Almost, Rose cleared her throat. "We should prepare for the possibility of an attack," she said practically. "Move the cattle to the north pasture where they're less visible from the road. Position men at strategic points around the property, and make sure everyone is armed." Cole nodded in agreement. "I'll organize the men, you prepare the house." As Cole left to carry out his plans, Rose turned to Ruby. "Can you shoot?" she asked bluntly. Ruby nodded. Every woman in her settlement had learned basic firearm use as a matter of survival. "Good," Rose said, opening a cabinet and removing a revolver. "This was my mother's. It's lighter than most, easier for a woman to handle." She checked that it was loaded before handing it to Ruby. "Keep it with you. Hopefully you won't need to use it, but if you do." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Ruby accepted the weapon, its weight both reassuring and terrifying in her hand. She had never shot a person before, had never thought she could. But the memories of what the raiders had done to her friends and neighbors hardened her resolve. If they came for her, she would not die without a fight. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of preparations. Men moved about the property, reinforcing defenses and establishing lookout positions. Rose supervised the securing of the house, making sure windows could be quickly barricaded and that essential supplies were readily accessible. By nightfall, Double Creek had been transformed from a working ranch to a fortress. Cole gathered everyone in the main house for final instructions. The ranch hands would rotate watches through the night, while the women Rose, Ruby, Maria, and the wife of one of the hands would remain inside, ready to provide support if needed. "We don't know if they'll come tonight or at all," Cole concluded, "but we'll be ready if they do." As the men dispersed to their assigned positions, Cole approached Ruby, who stood near the window peering out at the darkening landscape. "You should try to rest," he suggested gently. "Rose has prepared a room upstairs for you tonight, more defensible than your usual room." Ruby shook her head, clutching the revolver Rose had given her. Rest was impossible when every shadow might contain a threat, when every sound might be the approach of men who had already taken everything from her once. Cole seemed to understand. "Then I'll keep you company for a while," he said, settling into a chair near her position at the window. "If that's all right with you." Ruby nodded, grateful for his presence. There was something steadying about Cole, a quiet strength that made the night seem less threatening. They sat in companionable silence for some time, each lost in their own thoughts. Ruby's mind kept returning to the raid on her settlement, to the faces of the children she had taught, now gone forever. To her parents, her younger brother, all wiped out in a single night of violence. "I wish you could tell me what happened to you," Cole said suddenly, his voice low to avoid disturbing the tense quiet of the house. "Not just the facts, but how you felt, what you thought. I wish I could hear your voice." Ruby turned to look at him, surprised by the personal nature of his comment. In the dim lamplight, his face was a study in concern and something else, a warmth that made her heart beat faster. She reached for her notebook and wrote, "I wish that too, more than anything." Cole read her words and nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Maybe someday," he said softly. "When you feel safe again. When the memories aren't so fresh." Ruby wasn't sure if her voice would ever return. The doctor in her settlement had once told her mother about a man who had stopped speaking after a mining accident, his silence lasting years. But Cole's optimism touched her. He believed in her healing, even if she didn't, she wrote. "Why are you so kind to me?" Cole considered her question seriously. "At first it was simple humanity," he admitted. "You were in trouble and I could help, that's reason enough." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But now I think it's because I see something in you that I admire. Strength, resilience. You survived something terrible, something that would have broken many people, yet here you are, still fighting." His honesty left Ruby speechless in more ways than one. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such direct appreciation of her character rather than her appearance or accomplishments. Before she could formulate a response, a low whistle came from outside, a signal from one of the watchmen. Cole was on his feet instantly, his hand going to his holster. "Stay here," he instructed, moving toward the door. "That's the alert signal, someone's approaching." Ruby's heart hammered in her chest as Cole slipped outside. Rose appeared from the kitchen, a rifle in her hands. "Keep away from the windows," she advised Ruby, "and be ready to move upstairs if I give the word." The minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Ruby could hear muffled voices outside but couldn't make out what was being said. Her palms were slick with sweat around the handle of the revolver, and she found herself taking quick, shallow breaths that made her lightheaded. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably only 10 minutes, the door opened, and Cole stepped back inside. His expression was grim but not alarmed. "False alarm," he reported. "One of the Thompsons' boys looking for his pa. The sheriff's posse came through their place a few hours ago, heading east. Seems the raiders were spotted near the territorial border." Rose lowered her rifle with a sigh of relief. "East, away from us." "For now," Cole agreed, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "I've told the men to maintain the watch anyway, no sense taking chances." Ruby felt the tension drain from her body, leaving her suddenly exhausted. The emotional strain of the day, combined with the physical exertion of the afternoon's ride, had depleted her reserves. Cole noticed her fatigue immediately. "You should sleep," he said, his voice gentle with concern. "The immediate danger seems to have passed." This time, Ruby didn't resist the suggestion. She nodded and allowed Rose to lead her upstairs to the prepared room. As she settled onto the bed, still fully dressed in case they needed to move quickly, Ruby realized that for the first time since the raid on her settlement, she had thought of something besides her own survival. She had worried about Cole, about Rose, about the people of Double Creek. It was a small shift, but a significant one. She was beginning to care again, beginning to reconnect with the world beyond her trauma. And that, Ruby decided as sleep claimed her, was its own kind of victory. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with no sign of the danger that had kept everyone at Double Creek on high alert through the night. Rose brought Ruby breakfast in her room, freshly baked bread, preserves, and coffee that smelled like heaven after days of trail rations. "Cole's gone to town with John," Rose informed her as Ruby ate. "The sheriff sent word that they've captured 2 of the raiders. Cole wants to make sure they're the same men who attacked your settlement." Ruby's hand froze halfway to her mouth, bread forgotten as this news registered. Captured. 2 of them, at least, would face justice. It wasn't enough, would never be enough to balance the scales against what they had done, but it was something. She wrote, "I should go too, identify them." Rose read the note and shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not, it's too dangerous. If the other raiders are still out there, they might recognize you." Ruby hadn't considered that possibility. The idea that the remaining raiders might see her, might realize she was a survivor who could identify them, sent a chill through her body. Yet part of her felt that she owed it to the dead to stand witness against their killers. She wrote, "I need to do this. For my people." Rose studied Ruby's determined expression. "I understand," she said finally, "but Cole won't like it. He's protective by nature, especially of you." The last part was said with a significant look that made Ruby's cheeks warm. She had noticed Cole's attentiveness, of course, but had attributed it to his general kindness rather than any particular interest in her. The idea that he might see her as something more than a responsibility was both thrilling and terrifying. Before she could respond, the sound of hoofbeats in the yard drew their attention. Rose moved to the window. "They're back already," she observed with surprise. That was quick. Ruby followed her downstairs to meet Cole and John as they dismounted. Cole's expression was thunderous, his jaw set in a hard line that spoke of barely contained anger. "What happened?" Rose demanded as soon as they entered the house. "They weren't the right men," Cole spat, pacing the entryway like a caged animal. "Just ordinary horse thieves who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The sheriff's still tracking the real raiders, but they've got at least a day's head start across the territorial line." The news hit Ruby like a physical blow. Her hope of justice, however small, had been crushed. The raiders were still out there, still free to hurt others as they had hurt her community. Cole noticed her distress and immediately softened his tone. "I'm sorry, Ruby. I know you were hoping for better news." Ruby nodded, acknowledging his apology but unable to hide her disappointment. She had known, realistically, that capturing all the raiders was unlikely, but the brief flare of hope had been painful to lose. "There's more," John added, his weathered face grim. "Word in town is that these raiders have been working their way west for months. They hit settlements in Colorado, then Wyoming, now here. Always the same pattern. They appear at night, kill anyone who resists, take what they want and burn what they leave behind." "A path of destruction," Rose murmured, her voice tight with anger. "And the law always one step behind." Cole nodded grimly. "The territorial governor has finally authorized a special detachment of soldiers to hunt them down, but it could be weeks before they're organized and deployed. Weeks during which more innocent people will die," John concluded. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this sobering reality. Ruby stared at the floor, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the threat. It wasn't just about her anymore, or even about justice for her settlement. These men would continue their reign of terror until someone stopped them permanently. "Well," Rose said finally, practical as always, "standing around worrying won't change anything. We maintain our defenses, keep our eyes open, and carry on with our lives." She turned to John. "The north pasture needs attention. The fence was damaged in that storm last week." John nodded, accepting the change of subject with evident relief. "I'll take Miguel and a couple of the boys to fix it today. And I need to check on the new calves," Cole added, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of weariness. "Life goes on, raiders or no raiders." As the men left to attend to their tasks, Rose turned to Ruby. "Are you up to helping me in the garden today? The fresh air would do you good, and I could use an extra pair of hands with the vegetables." Ruby nodded, grateful for something productive to do. Dwelling on the raiders and their escape would only feed her fear, and she was tired of being afraid. The garden proved to be a sanctuary of sorts. Located behind the house, it was a substantial plot with neat rows of vegetables and a small orchard of fruit trees at the far end. Rose handed Ruby a basket and a pair of gardening gloves. "The beans need picking," she instructed, "and watch for snakes under the leaves. They like the shade." Ruby set to work, finding unexpected peace in the rhythmic task. The feel of sun warmed beans in her hands, the smell of rich earth, the distant sounds of ranch life all served to ground her in the present moment, pulling her away from dark memories and fears. As they worked side by side, Rose began to talk, her voice matter of fact as she shared stories about Double Creek, about growing up as the only girl on a remote ranch, about her parents and their dreams for the land they had claimed. "Ma wanted roses everywhere," she said, gesturing toward a carefully tended rose garden near the house. "Pa said it was impractical, but he planted them anyway. Said he already had one rose, might as well have 100 more." She smiled at the memory. "When they died, influenza, winter of '67, Cole and I nearly lost the ranch. I was 19, he was 21. Neither of us knew enough about running a place this size. Ruby listened, fascinated by this glimpse into the Matthews siblings' history. She had wondered how they had ended up alone, managing such a substantial property at relatively young ages. Cole wanted to sell, Rose continued, her hands never pausing in their work. Thought it was too much for us to handle, but I couldn't bear to let go of what our parents had built. Pride entered her voice as she added, so we learned, made mistakes, nearly went bankrupt twice, but we survived. And now Double Creek is one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Ruby could hear the love for this place in Rose's voice, could see it in the care she took with every plant in her garden. Double Creek wasn't just land and buildings to the Matthews siblings, it was their heritage, their future, their home in the deepest sense of the word. For the first time, Ruby allowed herself to truly consider what she had lost. Not just people, though that pain was immeasurable, but place, belonging. The schoolhouse where she had taught, the small cabin she had shared with her parents and brother, the community that had accepted her as one of their own despite her youth and unmarried status. All gone, reduced to ashes and painful memories. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision as she continued mechanically picking beans. One escaped and rolled down her cheek before she could wipe it away. Rose noticed immediately. "Oh, Ruby," she said softly, setting down her basket and moving to Ruby's side. "I'm so sorry. Here I am rambling about our hardships when you've lost so much more." Ruby shook her head, not wanting Rose to feel guilty for sharing her family's story. She reached for the small slate and chalk she had taken to carrying for quick communications and wrote, "Your story gives me hope." That life can go on after loss. Rose read the message and squeezed Ruby's hand. "It does go on," she agreed. "Different than before, but it goes on all the same." After a pause, she added more hesitantly, "You could have a place here, you know, if you wanted it. Double Creek could use a teacher for the children of our workers. And," she smiled slightly, "my brother could use a wife." Ruby's eyes widened at this direct statement. She had sensed Cole's interest, had even begun to acknowledge her own growing feelings for him, but Rose's blunt suggestion of marriage took her by surprise. Rose laughed at her expression. "Don't look so shocked. I've seen how he looks at you and how you look at him when you think no one's watching. Cole's never shown interest in any woman before you arrived, not like this." Ruby's cheeks burned with embarrassment. Was she so transparent? She wrote, "We barely know each other." "Time fixes that," Rose replied pragmatically. "And sometimes you just know." Her expression softened. "I'm not trying to rush you, Ruby. Heaven knows you've been through enough without me pushing you toward my brother. I just want you to know that there's a place for you here. A future if you want it." The idea was simultaneously terrifying and tempting. A future at Double Creek, with Cole, with a new purpose teaching children, with a family perhaps someday. It seemed almost too much to hope for after everything she had lost. Ruby wrote, "I need time." "Of course you do," Rose agreed immediately. "And you have it. No one's expecting you to make life decisions while you're still healing." She picked up her basket again. "Now let's finish these beans before the sun gets too high. Maria's making stew for dinner." They worked in companionable silence for a while longer before the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Cole appeared around the side of the house, leading his horse toward them. "Rose," he called as he approached, "we've got trouble at the north fence." "Looks like someone cut it deliberately." Rose straightened, all traces of the relaxed gardener vanishing as she became once again the capable co-owner of Double Creek. "Raiders? Can't say for certain," Cole replied, his expression grave, "but it wasn't natural damage. Someone wanted our cattle to wander out or wanted access in." Ruby felt a chill despite the warm sunshine. If the raiders had found Double Creek if they were planning an attack. Cole turned to her, his blue eyes serious. "Ruby, I want you to stay close to the house today. Don't go anywhere alone, not even to the stables." He hesitated, then added, "I don't want to frighten you, but I need you to be careful." Ruby nodded her understanding, appreciating his directness. Fear was a familiar companion now, but knowing the specific nature of a threat was better than vague warnings or false reassurances. She wrote on her slate, "You be careful too." Cole read her message and his expression softened momentarily. "I will," he promised. "We're doubling the watches and bringing the cattle in closer to the ranch house. If anyone tries to hit us, they'll find it harder than they expected." After he rode off to continue his inspection of the property, Rose turned to Ruby. "Let's finish up here quickly," she suggested. "I'd feel better with you inside, especially if someone is watching the ranch." They completed their harvesting in record time and returned to the house, where Maria was indeed preparing a hearty stew with vegetables from the previous day's picking. The cook's normally cheerful demeanor was subdued, affected by the tension that now permeated Double Creek. "Senor Cole says we must be careful," she told Rose as they entered the kitchen. "Miguel is cleaning all the guns. He says we must be ready." Rose nodded, setting her basket on the table. "We will be, Maria. We've faced threats before." "Not like these men," Maria replied, crossing herself. "These are not men, they are demons." Ruby couldn't disagree with the cook's assessment. Anyone who could do what the raiders had done to her settlement had indeed abandoned their humanity. The rest of the day passed in a state of heightened alertness. Cole returned mid-afternoon with the news that they had repaired the fence and found tracks a single horse, recently shod, leading away toward the east. Whether it was a scout for the raiders or just a passing traveler with malicious intent, they couldn't determine. "We'll maintain the watch rotation," Cole decided. 2 men at all times, positioned to see all approaches to the ranch house. He looked tired, Ruby thought, the strain of leadership visible in the set of his shoulders and the lines around his eyes. That evening, after a tense dinner where conversation was minimal, Ruby found herself once again sitting with Cole in the parlor, watching the darkness gather outside. Rose had gone to check on Maria, who was preparing food for the men on watch duty. "I'm sorry about this," Cole said suddenly, breaking the silence. "You came here for safety, and instead you found yourself in another dangerous situation." Ruby shook her head, reaching for her slate. She wrote, "Not your fault. You've done everything possible to protect everyone." Cole read her words but didn't seem reassured. "I keep thinking about what happened to your settlement," he admitted. "About how quickly everything can change, how fragile security really is out here." Ruby understood his fear all too well. She had lived through the reality of that fragility, had seen how quickly violence could shatter a peaceful community. She wrote, "We can only do our best. The rest is in God's hands." The words surprised her as she wrote them. Ruby hadn't thought much about God since the raid. Had wondered in her darkest moments how a benevolent deity could allow such suffering. Yet some part of her still clung to the faith her parents had instilled in her from childhood. Cole studied her message thoughtfully. "My mother used to say something similar," he said. "Prepare as if everything depends on you, pray as if everything depends on God." A small smile touched his lips. Rose takes after her in that regard, practical faith, she calls it. Ruby smiled in response, warming to this glimpse of Cole's family history. She wrote, "Your parents sound like good people." "They were," Cole agreed. "They would have liked you." He hesitated, then added more softly, "I like you, Ruby, more than I probably should, given the circumstances." Ruby's heart skipped a beat at his directness. She had known, or at least suspected, that his feelings went beyond simple concern for her welfare. Rose's earlier comments had confirmed it, but hearing it directly from Cole himself was different. She wasn't sure how to respond. Part of her wanted to acknowledge her own growing feelings for him, the flutter in her stomach when he entered a room, the comfort she found in his presence, the way his smile could momentarily banish the darkness of her memories. But another part hesitated, afraid of what it might mean to open her heart again when the world had proven so dangerous. Before she could decide what to write, a sharp whistle came from outside, the same alert signal they had heard the previous night. Cole was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with his hand on his holster. "Someone's coming," he said, his voice tense. "Fast, single rider." Ruby joined him at the window, peering out into the gathering darkness. In the fading light, she could make out a horse galloping toward the ranch house, its rider bent low over its neck. "It's Miguel," Cole identified the rider with relief. "But something's wrong, he's riding too hard." Without waiting for further developments, Cole strode to the door, opening it just as Miguel pulled his lathered horse to a sliding stop in the yard. The ranch hand dismounted in a single fluid motion, his face grim in the light spilling from the house. "Riders," he reported breathlessly. 8 of them coming from the east, armed. They'll be here within the hour." Ruby felt the blood drain from her face. 8 riders, the same number as the raiders who had destroyed her settlement. It couldn't be a coincidence. Cole's expression hardened. "Are you certain they're heading for Double Creek?" Miguel nodded. "They asked at the Thompson place about the nearest large ranch. Mrs. Thompson told me when I rode by to check on them." "Then we need to prepare," Cole said, his voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "Get John and the others. Tell them to take positions around the house. I want every approach covered." As Miguel hurried to comply, Rose appeared in the doorway, her face questioning. Cole quickly explained the situation. "We need to get the women to the safe room," he concluded. "You, Ruby, Maria, and Senora Diaz, take provisions and weapons." Rose nodded, her expression resolute. "I'll gather what we need." She turned to Ruby. "Come help me prepare the room." The safe room, as Rose called it, was a small chamber built into the center of the house, with no windows and a heavy oak door that could be barred from the inside. Rose had already begun stocking it with supplies: water, preserved food, extra ammunition, and medical supplies. "My father built this when raiders were common during the early days of the territory," Rose explained as they worked. "We've never had to use it before, but he always said it was better to have protection and not need it than to need it and not have it." Ruby helped in silence, her mind racing with memories of the last raid she had witnessed. The screams, the gunfire, the smell of smoke and blood. Would history repeat itself here at Double Creek? Would she once again be the sole survivor of a massacre? No, she decided firmly. This time was different. Cole and his men were prepared. They knew the raiders were coming and had taken defensive positions. And this time Ruby herself was not helpless. She had a weapon and the will to use it. When the room was prepared, Rose gathered Maria and Senora Diaz, the wife of one of the ranch hands. Both women were frightened but composed, following Rose's instructions without question. Cole appeared at the door as they were making final preparations. "They're close," he reported. "We can see their torches on the eastern ridge." His eyes found Ruby's in the lamplight. "Stay with Rose. Do exactly as she tells you if things go badly." He hesitated, then continued, "There's a tunnel from the safe room that leads to the creek bed. Use it if you have to." Rose approached her brother and placed a hand on his arm. "Be careful, Cole. These aren't ordinary bandits." "I know," he replied grimly. "We're ready for them." He turned to leave, but Ruby caught his arm, stopping him. Their eyes met, and Ruby wished desperately that she could speak, could tell him all the things suddenly welling up in her heart. Instead, she did the only thing she could. She rose on tiptoe and pressed a swift kiss to his cheek. Cole looked startled for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "I'll take that as a promise," he said softly. "We'll finish this conversation when the raiders are dealt with." After he left, Rose herded the women into the safe room and secured the door. The space was small but not cramped, with a single oil lamp providing warm, golden light. Rose positioned herself near the door, rifle across her lap, while Maria and Senora Diaz huddled together on a narrow cot in the corner. Ruby sat beside Rose, the revolver cool and heavy in her hand. The waiting was excruciating, every sound from outside amplified by her fear, every minute stretching into what felt like hours. "They're here," Rose whispered suddenly, her head tilted as she listened to the sounds filtering through the thick walls. "I can hear horses in the yard." Ruby strained her ears and caught the muffled sound of voices too distant to make out words, but the tone was unmistakably threatening. Then came a sound she remembered all too well from the night her settlement was destroyed, the sharp crack of gunfire. The battle for Double Creek had begun. The next hour passed in a haze of fear and tension. The sounds of combat filtered through to the safe room: shouts, gunfire, the crash of breaking glass, and once, an explosion that shook the very foundations of the house. "Dynamite," Rose muttered grimly. "They're trying to blast their way in." Ruby's hands trembled as she gripped the revolver, every muscle in her body tense with the anticipation of combat. If the raiders breached the house, if they found the safe room, she would not die without a fight. The gunfire intensified, then gradually began to taper off. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise had been impossible to interpret, heavy with possibilities both hopeful and horrifying. Then came a sound that made all four women freeze: footsteps in the house, approaching the safe room. Heavy boots on wooden floors, coming closer with deliberate slowness. Rose raised her rifle, aiming at the door. "Get back," she whispered to the others. If it's not Cole or one of our men, start shooting the moment that door opens. Ruby positioned herself beside Rose, revolver raised. Maria and Senora Diaz pressed themselves against the far wall, each clutching a kitchen knife, a last line of defense if the guns failed. A knock came at the door, 3 quick raps, then 2 slow ones. Rose's shoulders sagged with relief. "That's Cole's signal," she explained, lowering her rifle and moving to unbar the door. When the door swung open, Cole stood there, his face smudged with gunpowder and a bloody gash across his forehead, but very much alive. Behind him, Ruby could see other ranch hands, some injured but all standing. "It's over," Cole announced, his voice rough with exhaustion. "We got them." Rose stepped forward and embraced her brother tightly. "All of them, 3 dead, 5 captured," Cole confirmed, returning his sister's hug before gently disengaging to look at Ruby. "They won't hurt anyone else." Ruby felt her knees go weak with relief. It was over. The men who had haunted her nightmares, who had stolen everything from her, were finally stopped. Justice would be served. She moved toward Cole, needing to see for herself that he was truly all right. The cut on his forehead looked painful but not serious. His eyes, when they met hers, were clear and steady despite the fatigue evident in every line of his body. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his gaze sweeping over her with concern. Ruby shook her head, then gestured to his injury with a questioning look. It's nothing," he dismissed. "Flying glass when they shot out the parlor window. John got the worst of it, took a bullet in the shoulder, but Doc Sanders is with him now, says he'll recover." Rose organized the other women to help tend the wounded men, leaving Ruby and Cole standing alone in the corridor outside the safe room. For a moment, neither moved, the reality of what had just happened and what might have happened hanging heavy between them. Then Cole reached out slowly, giving Ruby time to pull away if she wished, and touched her cheek with calloused fingers. "I was afraid," he admitted quietly. "Not of dying, but of failing, of not being able to protect everyone, of not being able to protect you." Ruby understood that fear all too well. It had been her constant companion since the night her settlement was raided. The fear of loss, of watching others die while being powerless to stop it. She reached up and covered his hand with her own, holding it against her cheek in a gesture that conveyed what words could not, that she understood, that she shared his fear, that she was grateful beyond measure for his protection. Cole's eyes softened, and he leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to retreat. Ruby didn't move, her heart hammering in her chest as his lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. It was brief, a moment of connection amid the chaos of the night, but when Cole pulled back, something had changed between them. An acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since the day he found her in the forest. A promise of possibilities neither had dared to consider until now. "I should help with the wounded," Cole said reluctantly, though he made no move to step away from her. Ruby nodded her understanding. There would be time later for whatever was developing between them. For now, there were more pressing concerns. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The sheriff and his deputies arrived, having heard the gunfire from the direction of Double Creek while pursuing the raiders. The captured men were bound and loaded into a wagon for transport to the territorial prison, while the dead were wrapped in canvas for burial. Ruby watched from the porch as the raiders were led away, studying their faces in the light of the lanterns. She recognized them from that terrible night, the same cruel eyes, the same callous disregard for human life. One of them glared at her as he was led past, recognition dawning in his expression. "You," he spat, "the teacher, you should be dead." Cole, who had been speaking with the sheriff nearby, whirled at the man's words and strode to Ruby's side. "She survived," he told the raider coldly. "And now she'll see justice done for what you did to her people." The raider laughed, a chilling sound devoid of humor. "Justice? There ain't no justice out here, just survival. We survived, they didn't. That's all there is to it." "Take him away," the sheriff ordered, disgusted. "He'll hang along with the rest of them." As the wagon rolled away with its grim cargo, Ruby felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that the threat was finally neutralized, grief for all that had been lost, and a strange, hollow feeling where her fear had lived for so long. Without that constant terror driving her, she felt momentarily adrift, uncertain of what came next. Cole seemed to sense her confusion. "It's over," he said softly, standing beside her as they watched the wagon disappear down the road. They can't hurt anyone else now. Ruby nodded, knowing he was right but finding it hard to fully believe. The raiders had dominated her thoughts for so long that their absence left a void painful in its own way, but also liberating. She reached for her slate and wrote, "What happens now?" Cole read her question and considered it carefully. "Now we rebuild," he said simply. "Repair the damage to the ranch, tend to the wounded, and start looking forward instead of back." Ruby nodded again, but another question burned in her mind, one she was afraid to ask but needed to know the answer to. She wrote, "Where do I go from here?" Cole's expression softened as he read her words. "That depends," he replied, his voice gentle. "Where do you want to go, Ruby?" It was a question she hadn't allowed herself to consider. After the raid, her only goal had been survival one day at a time, one step at a time. The future had been an unaffordable luxury. Now, standing on the porch of Double Creek, with the immediate threat removed and possibilities spreading before her like the vast Montana sky, Ruby found herself able to contemplate what she truly wanted. She wrote, "I want to stay, if that's all right." Cole's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "More than all right," he assured her. "Double Creek is your home for as long as you want it to be." After a pause, he added more softly, "I hope that will be a very long time." The days following the raid on Double Creek were filled with activity. Repairs to the damaged buildings began immediately, with everyone on the ranch pitching in to help. The wounded recovered under Rose's capable nursing, and life gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. Ruby found herself increasingly integrated into the rhythm of ranch life. She helped Rose with household tasks, assisted Maria in the kitchen, and even began spending time with the children of the ranch hands, informally teaching them reading and arithmetic in the afternoons. Cole was busy with ranch business, often riding out at dawn and not returning until dusk. But he made time each evening to sit with Ruby on the porch, watching the sunset and slowly, patiently learning to communicate with her through more than just written words. He developed a sensitivity to her expressions, to the small gestures and looks that conveyed her thoughts almost as clearly as speech. And Ruby, for her part, found herself relaxing in his company, less self-conscious about her silence, more confident in their growing connection. A month after the raid, as they sat together on the porch swing in the gathering twilight, Cole turned to her with an unusually serious expression. "Ruby," he began, his voice hesitant in a way that immediately caught her attention. "I've been thinking a lot about us. About what I want for my future, for our future if you're willing." Ruby's heart began to race. She had suspected this conversation might be coming, had seen it in Cole's eyes and in the increasing tenderness of his behavior toward her. Yet now that the moment was here, she found herself both eager and afraid. Cole took her hands in his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I know it hasn't been long," he continued, "and I know you've been through more than anyone should have to endure. If you need more time, I understand. But I want you to know that I love you, Ruby Fletcher. I think I started falling in love with you that first day in the forest when you looked at me with such courage despite your fear." Ruby felt tears spring to her eyes, not tears of sadness, but of a joy so intense it was almost painful. She had thought herself broken beyond repair after the raid, incapable of feeling anything but fear and grief. Yet here she was, her heart overflowing with love for this man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and found strength rather than weakness. Cole reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a simple gold ring with a single pearl. "This was my mother's," he explained. "Rose kept it for me, said I'd know when it was time to pass it on." His blue eyes, earnest and hopeful, met hers. "Ruby Fletcher, will you marry me? Will you make Double Creek your permanent home and me the happiest man in the territory?" Ruby's hands trembled as she took the slate from her lap. She wrote a single word. Yes. Cole's face broke into a smile of such radiant happiness that it took her breath away. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her, and then leaned forward to kiss her with a tenderness that made her heart sing. When they parted, Cole rested his forehead against hers, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise to spend the rest of my life making you happy," he vowed. "To protect you, to honor you, and to always listen for what you're saying, even when you don't use words." Ruby felt something stir in her throat, a pressure, a tightness that was both painful and promising. She swallowed hard, her hand going to her neck in surprise. Cole noticed the gesture immediately. "Ruby, are you all right?" She nodded, then opened her mouth, trying to form words that had been locked away since the night of the raid. Her voice, when it finally came, was a rasping whisper, barely audible even in the quiet of the evening. "I love you." Cole's eyes widened in astonishment, then filled with tears of joy. "Ruby," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. "You spoke." She nodded again, overwhelmed by the sensation of her own voice after so many months of silence. It hurt to speak, her vocal cords rusty from disuse, but the pain was insignificant compared to the triumph of breaking through the wall of trauma that had silenced her. "I love you," she repeated, the words slightly stronger this time. "Cole." He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you too," he murmured against her hair. "So much." From the doorway came a soft gasp. They turned to see Rose standing there, her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. "She spoke," Cole told his sister, his voice filled with wonder. "Ruby spoke." Rose hurried to them, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Oh, Ruby," she said, clasping Ruby's hands in her own. "What a blessing, what a miracle." It wasn't a miracle, Ruby knew. It was healing, slow, painful healing made possible by safety, by care, and most of all by love. The trauma that had stolen her voice had not disappeared, would likely never completely vanish. But it no longer controlled her, no longer defined her. "Thank you," she whispered to Rose. "For everything." Rose embraced her warmly, then stepped back with a smile. "I'll leave you two to celebrate this wonderful news," she said, her tone suggesting she knew there was more to celebrate than just Ruby's returning voice. "Though I expect a formal announcement at breakfast tomorrow." After Rose had gone back inside, Cole turned to Ruby with a tender smile. "May I hear it again?" he asked softly. "My name on your lips is the sweetest sound I've ever heard." "Cole," Ruby obliged, her voice still raspy but growing stronger with each word. "My love, my future." In the gathering darkness, with the stars beginning to appear overhead and the sounds of night creatures starting their evening chorus, Cole and Ruby sat together on the porch of what would now be their home, planning a future neither had dared to imagine before they found each other. 6 months later, on a perfect spring day with wildflowers carpeting the hills around Double Creek, Ruby stood before the small gathering of friends and neighbors, her hand clasped firmly in Cole's as they exchanged their vows. Her voice, though still softer than it had been before the raid, rang clear in the afternoon air as she promised to love, honor, and cherish this man who had helped her find her way back to herself, who had heard her even in her silence, who had given her a home when she had nothing, and hope when she had lost all reason to believe in tomorrow. "I take you, Cole Matthews, to be my husband," she said, the words carrying across the ranch yard to the assembled guests. "To share in your joys and sorrows, to support your dreams as you have supported mine, and to build a life with you that honors the gift we have been given in finding each other." Cole's eyes, blue as the Montana sky above them, shone with love as he repeated his own vows. When the ceremony concluded and they were pronounced husband and wife, he kissed her with a reverence that brought tears to Ruby's eyes. "Welcome home, Mrs. Matthews," he whispered against her lips. Ruby smiled, her heart full to bursting with love and gratitude. "I've been home since the day you found me," she replied. "I just didn't know it yet." The celebration that followed was joyous, with music and dancing lasting well into the evening. Ruby found herself surrounded by the community that had embraced her Rose, radiant with happiness for her brother and new sister-in-law, John and the other ranch hands who had fought alongside Cole to protect Double Creek, Maria and the other women who had welcomed her into their circle, and the children she now taught in a proper schoolroom Cole had built for her as a wedding present. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the valley, Cole led Ruby away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the creek that gave the ranch its name. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully on the lush spring grass, and the mountains stood sentinel against the darkening sky. "Happy?" Cole asked, his arm around her waist as they contemplated the view. "More than I ever thought possible," Ruby answered truthfully. She turned in his embrace to face him, reaching up to trace the lines of his beloved face with gentle fingers. "I never imagined, when you found me in those woods, that I would find not just safety but joy, Not just healing, but love. Cole caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. You saved me too, you know, he said softly. Before you came, I was just existing. Running the ranch, doing my duty, never really living. His eyes, serious now, held hers. You taught me what courage really looks like, what strength really means. Ruby shook her head, still sometimes uncomfortable with praise. I was terrified, she reminded him. I couldn't even speak. And yet you survived, Cole countered. You endured. And when the raiders came to Double Creek, you were ready to fight alongside us despite your fear. His voice roughened with emotion. That's true courage, Ruby, not the absence of fear, but the determination to face it. She leaned into him, drawing strength and comfort from his solid presence. We faced it together, she said, and we will face whatever comes next the same way. Cole's arms tightened around her as the first stars appeared in the eastern sky. Together, he agreed, always together. As they stood there, watching night claim the land they both loved, Ruby reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the devastation of the raid to the terror of her flight through the wilderness. From the moment Cole found her, frightened and voiceless, to this day of joy and promise, her voice had returned, though it would always bear the subtle marks of her trauma, slightly huskier than before, occasionally failing her when memories grew too strong. But Cole had taught her that communication went beyond words. That love could speak in 1,000 ways, through touch, through presence, through understanding. In the language of love, they had found a fluency that transcended her silence. And in that language, they would write the story of their future together at Double Creek. When they returned to the celebration, hand in hand under the star-filled Montana sky, Ruby carried within her a sense of completion she had never expected to find again. The wounds of her past would always be part of her, but they no longer defined her. She was Ruby Matthews now, teacher, wife, survivor. And as she joined her husband in a dance beneath lantern light, her voice blending with his in laughter and conversation, she embraced the truth that had saved her, that even in the darkest wilderness, love could find a way to be heard.